Let's begin. It's Reish Shvat. We're up to the Chav Beis Amid Aleph, and we had a machlekes between Rav and Shmuel. If you only have 5 psukim, what do you do? And 2 aliyahs, Rav says you repeat one of the psukim, and Shmuel says that you break one of the psukim in half. Rav doesn't agree because any pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do, we don't want to do as well. Any pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say in that particular oifen, we don't want to say it as well. So therefore, we don't follow that. And what do you call it? And what is the reason of why we actually repeat a pasuk? Shmuel doesn't like that, and he says the problem is if you, let's say there's 5 psukim. If you read the first 3, you're leaving only 2 psukim behind. If somebody then walks into shul, they somebody walks. You only leave 2 psukim. Somebody walks out. They'll think, well, the next aliyah is only going to have 2 psukim. That's a problem. And if you're only going to read, let's say, 1 pasuk in the new paragraph to make up what you, let's say you started, you have 2 psukim you before, and you're going to read 1 pasuk into the next sugya, the next subject. Somebody then who walks in, and will think that you only read 1 pasuk before. So we're going to So now the Gemara is going to ask a question. Chav Beis Amid Aleph, we are up to Meisaveh, is about 20 lines on the top of the page. Says the Gemara, Meisvei, I have a question. Parsha shel shisha psukim. It says in the Braisa, if you have a parsha of 6 psukim, very easy. You divide them in 2. The shel chamisha psukim, if you only have 5 psukim, be yachid, ideally you only do it 1. You only do it 1. And now, according to Rashi in Tainus, the Gemara is asking a question from here, on Rav and on Shmuel. It says clearly here, Parsha 5 psukim, and do 1. Why doesn't the Gemara suggest either divide the middle pasuk in half or repeat the middle pasuk? Rashi here doesn't think that's a question because Rashi here believes that Rashi says, you can read. It's talking about where you have time, or you can continue reading into the next parsha. And because you can continue reading the next parsha, it's not an ideal thing to repeat a pasuk or to divide a pasuk. Just continue. So this is another problem. What is the problem according to Rashi here? The next part of the Braisa, it says, the first guy already read 3 psukim, and you only leave 2 psukim behind. Hasheni kodesh nayim parsha. You read 2 from this parsha, the echad me parsha achedes, and you read 1 in the next parsha. Now, according to Rav, that is not an ideal situation. You read only 1 in the next parsha. Somebody coming in now will think that you only read 1 pasuk. Doesn't realize you read the 2 psukim prior to that as well. So it's a problem. So wouldn't it have been better to repeat instead of just reading 2 and then 1, just repeat the 3rd pasuk that the previous guy. This is not a question of Shmuel, because Shmuel says you have to divide a pasuk in half. And here we're talking about a case we already read the 3rd pasuk. It's too late to divide it in half. Another opinion says shleisha, you read 3 psukim into the next parsha. We don't want to read up in the new parsha less than 3 psukim, because if you read less than 3 psukim in the parsha, a guy coming in thinks he just read. He thinks that's the parsha you began, and you only read 1 or 2 psukim. Now, if Rav is correct, the one that says you repeat a pasuk, repeat it. And according to Rashi, when Agoid is the next few words, the one who says you should divide, you should divide. Not Goid is that, but Rashi Tainus is Goid it, because he learns the question from the first part of the Braisa, which says that you just have 5 psukim. Why don't we just, and when Rashi learned there, we don't have another parsha to read into, so why don't we just then divide a pasuk, or why don't we just repeat a pasuk? Anyway, as Gemara Shani Hasam we have an option here. This option of repeating a pasuk is a last resort. Now here we have another easy one. Continue into the next paragraph. The halacha is like this yesh oimri that says that we don't read into a new parsha less than 3 psukim. Talking about that, I'll say another thing. Just like we just said, that when you begin a new parsha, you never read less than 3 psukim, because somebody walks in and they only saw that you read in the new parsha 2 psukim. They might think that you started reading from the new parsha and all you read is 2 psukim. That's good enough. When we learned before, you need a minimum of 3. Kach, likewise, ein mishaydin beparsha pachas mishloisha psukim. So too, when you finish a subject, never leave less than 3 psukim in that particular parsha, because if you leave less than 3, somebody walks out, thinks that, well, the next aliyah will get those 2 psukim that are left, and think you can have 2 psukim. Says you want to pshita. What do you have to tell us the second halacha about leaving two psukim? Hashta now umas chalt madach when you're finishing off an aliyah and going into a new parsha. We said the kameko tanakama says I don't mind if you only read one pasuk, and yet machmidi yeshem. The Yeshem said no, we don't want you to read just one pasuk because the guy walks out. If a guy comes in, they think that you only read one pasuk in this thing. They're worried. The Tanakama is not worried, but the Machmir they're worried. So Shir, when it talks about you're finishing an aliyah and you're leaving in a new subject, you're leaving in a subject, you're leaving less than 3 psukim. The Machmir Tanakama agrees it's a problem because somebody walks out thinks he can have 2 psukim left. He's like, Coach, so surely yes, I will also be machmer. Why do you really have to tell us that? And then if it would seem surely everyone agrees, it's not even a question. Everyone would agree that you should never leave less than 3 psukim behind because somebody then walking out will think that the next aliyah is only going to read the balance, which is 2 psukim. Says more no. I would have thought when we were worried about people coming in other words, if you read into the new paragraph 1 or 2 psukim, and a guy walks in and he sees that in this subject you only read 2 psukim prior, he'll think an aliyah is good enough. That happens that people come late to show. In fact, it happens quite often. In the middle of Kriyas HaTorah to go home, is not common, and therefore we would have thought that if you are finishing an aliyah and you're leaving 2 psukim behind, we're not worried that somebody is going to leave right now and think, oh, only 2 psukim left, that's all they're going to read. The manche sefer Torah v'nafki. We don't think people generally do not leave in the middle of the sefer Torah and leave it behind and just walk out. Kamashlan to tell you that no, Rabbi says that even so, we're geyser that you don't leave 2 psukim because there are some people who leave and we don't want them to go with that mistaken notion. The Tanakama, so now let's understand the Tanakama's logic. Tanakama says don't leave 2 psukim behind because we're worried about people leaving. So why isn't he worried that if you're going to only read one pasuk into a new subject, why is he worried about people coming in, which is much more common? And they'll see you only read one pasuk before, 2 psukim before, they'll think, oh, that's good enough. Why isn't Tanakama worried about that? That should be more grounds for concern than somebody leaving, as we just explained. He said don't leave 2 psukim behind because we're worried about people leaving, which from the Yitzin, because people might even think that 2 psukim is enough, that the balance of 2 psukim, that's all they're going to have an aliyah. And surely, and the Tanakama surely should say that don't begin. Don't start in a new subject 2 psukim, because a guy walking in late will think that all you read was 2 psukim. And it's not much more common. Says the Gemara, Tanakama believes if anybody comes in late and he sees that there was only 2 psukim before, and he'll think, hey, that's a bit odd. They only had to leave 2 psukim. He'll turn around and ask somebody in shul. He'll ask somebody in shul what happened here, and they'll tell him that we read also the previous parsha. When he leaves, who's he going to ask? Rabbi Yosef said to the son of Yosef, what's halacha? He sent back to him. Halacha is daily, like Rab, you repeat a pasuk, the emtzoyin dalig, and which one? It's the middle aliyah that repeats a pasuk. Then our Mishnah said we had different number of aliyahs depending on the day, and the Mishnah says this is the rule. Kol sheyezbei musaf, any day that has musaf in it, like Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed, you read one more aliyah for. Yiboilu, I have a question. What about Tainis Tzibur? What about a fast day? Bekama, how many do you read? What's the shaila? Do we say Rosh Chodesh? Umayah the Ika Carbon Musaf? We're talking about a carbon Musaf. Abba is 4. Avlahach over here the leka carbon Musaf. Over here there's no carbon Musaf. Loy over here there's no carbon Musaf at all. On a tiny tzibur. Therefore, you only have 3 aliyahs. Ideal, perhaps it's not so much kar musav. It's the fact that you did something today more than you do in a normal weekday. On a tiny tzibur, also in the Shemon Esrei, we add a bracha anenu. So maybe that's sufficient. That warrants 4th aliyah. You add something to davening anenu. Says Toshma coming here. It says in our Mishnah, you read 4 days, you read 4 aliyahs. It seems clearly a habitaina tzibah when it comes to taina tzibah, gimel is 3 aliyahs. Because it says only Chol Hamoed and Rosh Chodesh is 4 aliyahs. Obviously, everything else is 3. If that's how you're going to dayik, let's look at the ratio. Look at the beginning. Let's infer from the beginning. Mishnah the other way around. On Monday and on Thursday and Shabbat mincha creating gimel, you read 3. But a tiny tzibur is 4, because it said the only time that you have 3 aliyahs is Monday, Thursday, Monday, and Shabbos. So obviously, tiny tzibur is not included. It should be 4 if you're going to be medayik for the Mishnah. Mishnah can't bring a proof one way or the others? Our question remains: how many aliyahs is on a tinus? First, we're coming here. The Rabbi Kulbaba almost came to bubble, but tinus on a tinus tibur. Come, he stood up. Caught up besifra. He gave him an aliyah. Pasach, he made a bracha in the outset. Pasach, he opened up. Bodich, he made a bracha. But Chosim, when he finished reading, Bodich, he did not make a bracha at the end. Now, why didn't he make a bracha at the end? Since he made a bracha in the beginning, it seems that we're talking about after the takana that every aliyah you make a bracha, because obviously Yisrael, he got the third aliyah, and he made a bracha in the beginning. It's obviously after takana. So why didn't he make? We'll come back to that in the beginning about the bracha in the beginning. So why didn't he make a bracha at the end? It seems he didn't make a bracha at the end because there'll be another aliyah after him. And this is talking about before the takana, when you don't make a bracha, and therefore he didn't make a bracha at the end because there'll be a fourth aliyah. So isn't that clear that a tiny tibula for aliyahs? That's what Gemara starts off with. Naful kuliyam. The second thing that happened, which we'll discuss later in the Gemara, naful kuliyam paya. They all didn't fill us up payim. They all fell on their faces. But Rabbi naful al pay. Rab didn't, and we'll come back to that soon. What happened there? Mechdi Rab be Yisrael. Kor Rab gets Yisrael. So my time, the aliyah of Yisrael, which is the last aliyah in the thing, is my time. Why is it? Chosam he concluded his reading. Well, about didn't make a bracha. Lav isn't it? Must be there's another li after him. Simple as that. No. Rav bekoyan, Rav received the aliyah of a kohen, even though he was a Yisrael. Now, how can it be? How can Yisrael get a kohen? We're learning Margit that for Darkei Shalom, whatever it is, they made that all that first aliyah should always be a kohen. So he answered, Rav Huna, we learned over the talking Margit and Rav Huna. Kari bekoyan, Rav Huna had the aliyah of kohen, even though he's Yisrael. So therefore, Rav the same thing. So he had the aliyah of kohen, and therefore there were two aliyahs after him. That's why he made a bracha before, didn't make a bracha afterwards. No proof that there are four aliyahs by a tinius. Says Gemara, what are you talking about? Bish leimer Rav Huna kari b'kohen. Rav Huna read kohenim b'ratzah Rav Asi b'Rav Ami. The kohen echashiv adar the Yisrael Rav Asi man who were kohenim, and they were from Eretz Yisrael. Make of kai Rav Huna. They were bottled Rav Huna. So some are showing him. So we see here that if someone has a godly Yisrael, he can get the aliyah of kohen, even though it says very halacha that today it doesn't apply. We don't have that kind of daily Yisrael. But and according to the Ashra and other Rishonim, it's dafka if this Yisrael God Ladoy is greater than any kohen in the whole world, because Rav Huna is in bubble, Rav Ami Rav Asi is in Eretz Yisrael, Kohen Chashiv Eretz Yisrael, and yet we're saying because the kohen in Eretz Yisrael felt secondary to Rav Huna got the first layer. Had they not, it doesn't matter that all the kohen in the bubble were inferior to Rav Huna. He still would not have got the Levi Yisrael. We need that all the kohen in the world should be inferior to him. That's what it seems in the Gemara here. But we actually had that Rav Asi was in bubble as well. So this could have been a time, even though we say he's a kohen Chashiv Eretz Yisrael, but maybe at that time they, when Rav Huna had the Levi Yisrael, they were in bubble. Anyhow, Rav Ha'ika Rav. But the Rav wasn't the greatest. So Harayik Shmuel was a kohen, and yet the Kanav v'Dabrele Shmuel, and yet the Rav allowed Shmuel to go ahead of him whenever they walked together. So we see that the Rav, in fact, felt inferior to Shmuel. Says no. Rav really had the aliyah of kohen, and make of a kaila Rav. The truth of the matter is that Shmuel was inferior to Rav. And Rav was kohen. So how come Rav allowed Shmuel to always go in front of him? But Rav would overlay covered. Rav gave him covered. As Rashi brings the Gemara here in Shabbos, where Rav cursed out Shmuel. There was a big argument, whatever he cursed out Shmuel, he shouldn't have any kids, and afterwards he regretted his curse. So therefore he always gave him covered. Says the Gemara, where did Rav give covered to Shmuel? Only before they were together. Before they're not together, he did not do that. Says the Gemara, it makes sense. The Rav Bekanik, and I'll prove it to the Rav actually got the aliyah of kohen, because if you're telling me that you're worried about Rav's bracha, if you tell me that what the reason why Rav did not make a bracha at the end is because there's another aliyah. So how come Rav did make a bracha in the beginning? It's the third aliyah. You should make a bracha in the beginning. Remember, before the takana, it was the first aliyah made the bracha in the beginning, but the last aliyah made bracha at the end. So obviously, Rav, this was the first aliyah. These are not to be so clever. There is a Yisrael. My time of body. Why do you make a bracha before? Says the Gemara. We're talking about after takana. That's why I made bracha before. Says the Gemara. So why taka didn't he make a bracha afterwards? Who cares if there was another aliyah afterwards? There was another aliyah. You have to make a bracha after the aliyah. Is Nami shiny and make a bracha as well. And what was the reason why we made this takana that everyone should make a bracha? Because Gzeida of Nechnosin and Yotzin. The Nechnosin are people who come in late, and they see that, and they think the guy the guy doesn't make if they didn't hear the first person make a bracha, they think there's no bracha at all for the Torah. So therefore, every aliyah makes a bracha, and at the end of the bracha, make a bracha. People leave in the middle, and they'll think there's no bracha achrayna, so it made every aliyah make a bracha achrayna. So Rav's town, Shiny Heicha the Yosef Rav, where Rav lived, the male ayil. People came in late, so therefore we worried about the bracha of the shayna. But maybe nothing. Nobody walked out of shul. Once you were there, you parked yourself in your seat and you stayed there. So therefore, they didn't need a takana of making a bracha afterwards. Toshma coming here. So another proof regarding Tiny Tzibur. It says, this is the rule. It says, it says in the Braisa, any day where the people don't really work, going Tiny Tzibur and Tisha. Sorry, any day where if you're staying in shul too long, you're going to lose out on work. For example, a Tiny Tzibur, except the last set when it comes to rain, or Tisha B'av, with the halach is a lot of work. It's just a minute that we don't work. Koyin Gimel, then you only call up 3 people because people have to rush back to work. But those days where you're not losing out so much, for example, you're not allowed to work unless it's a davar of it, you'll incur a loss. And regarding Rosh Chodesh as well, it's Rashi brings over here the famous picture of Rabbi Lazar that women don't work on Rosh Chodesh. And why don't they work on Rosh Chodesh? Because of the Egel Azov, they were given a reward. They refused to give their jewelry, part with their jewelry, to give the husbands to create the Egel Azov. So therefore, they were given a schar. The Yom Tov Rosh Chodesh is their day off. And what's the svara behind it? Maybe because they didn't believe in the Eibush Chas v'Shalom. So they follow the goyim, who follow the sun. The women who they believe the Eibishter, so therefore they follow the moon because the Eibishter gave us the moon as representing Klal Yisrael. So therefore, as a reward, they were given the schar of Rosh Chodesh. Tosfos actually uses the expression over here. He says, 4 lines on top of the page. He says, men are allowed to work Rosh Chodesh. Avol noshim asuras b'melacha. Not that it was a minig, a reward. They don't have to work. Tosfos says they're forbidden to do work, which is actually a discussion of Acharonim, but Tosfos clearly says Noshim Asudas Malacha, they're not allowed to work. But Rashi here brings another pshat where it seems from the Haftarah that we read on Rosh Chodesh, it says that about Rosh Chodesh that if you can contrast to the rest of the week, which is considered a working week, it sounds like even men didn't work on Rosh Chodesh as well, not just women. Anyway, continues, the whole idea is to do the work. So the Shema Mina says clearly here that on a tiny tzibur you only see aliyas. So there's a resolution to your question. Amar Ravashi says that's not really a proof because I have another. And look at our Mishnah. Look at our Mishnah. This is a rule. Coach by Muslim any day when the Mishnah usually gives a rule is trying to add something that alludes to something that wasn't clearly spelled out in the Mishnah. And the Mishnah said the rule is any day that has an extra addition, not Yom Tov, not a bar, you read 4. So what's it coming to add? It's not coming to add Rosh Chodesh or Chol because the Mishnah clearly spells it out. Lav Lasui Tiny Tzibur Tisha B'av must be the Mishnah coming to include Tiny Tzibur Tisha B'av. And what are you adding? Anenu. Says the Gemara, Ravashi, and according to Ravashi, so Masnisin. So you're telling me that our Mishnah holds you get for Aliyah. So it would seem that our Mishnah has no author. Mani loitana kama v'le'Rabbi doesn't come out, doesn't conform with any tana. What's the story? The time look Braisa. When we had this already in second time, is holy is b'sheni b'chamishi. If Tisha B'av, let's say he falls out on a Monday, or times falls out on a Monday or on a Thursday, then like any other Monday and Thursday trading gimel. Then you call talking about Tisha B'av, you call 3 people, umaftir echad, and one of the 3 people is the one who gets to have time. But what happens what happens if let's say Tuesday, Wednesday falls out? Then koida echad, umaftir echad. Then what you do is then you only call up one aliyah, and that same person gets to have Torah as well. Because it's not the normal day of reading. That's the Tanakh. He says, no, look at Gimel. I don't care for that Monday, Tuesday. You always call 3 people, Maftir Echad, and the Maftir is one of them. Clearly, nobody holds you get 4 aliyahs. Everyone holds 3. The question is, there's Tuesday, Wednesday. Says the Gemara, okay, the Rashi's been abbreviated, but how you going to the Mishnah? What's the Mishnah coming to add with that cloud? Well, the Kash is that cloud. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah is not coming to add with Chodesh and Cholamoid of Hedik Tanila. It says clearly in the Mishnah that it's Chodesh and Umayid. So the Abba is for Aliyah. So what's the Mishnah trying to add with that cloud if not Tainas Tibur? And so the Gemara is saying, Mona Ba'almiyav is trying to explain to you the reason. Simon, how you remember how many Aliyahs in each one? So he's giving you a way to remember. So like though you shouldn't think that Yom Tov and Cholamoid then you should be the same, both treated the same way. You get 5 Aliyahs. And this is the rule. Called the Tafid Le Milsa Mechavri, anything that has only one thing more than the one, then next to it has one more Aliyah. Tafid Le Gavri said it has one more Aliyah. We have something extra. Musaf, you have 4 Aliyahs. The Yom Tov, the Asr Yom has an additional thing you're not allowed to work. It's Chamisha 5. So you keep putting him, you get a punishment of Karas. It's Shisha 6 Aliyahs. Shabbos, because it's skilla, even a higher notch, you get skilla, then Shiva accept. Gufa, let's go back to what we said before. The Rab equal, but Rab came to Bavel on a tinius and he got an aliyah. But as it further, it says, "Come, Korah Sifri." He read the Sefer Torah Pasach when he started. He got his aliyah. Borich made a bracha. Chasam when he finished the aliyah, but the borich made a bracha, which we discussed just before. Aber nafel kuli alma pai. They all fell down on his face. The philosopher payim, but Rab lo nafel on. Rab did not fall on his face, and we want to know why not. My time, why he didn't the Rabbi November? Why didn't he fall on his face? No, why didn't he say tachma like everybody else did? Someone says a stone floor, and the Tani we learned in the Mishnah. It says the Evan maskis like sit the bars. Don't cover your floor with stone. Lishtach was allowed to bow down on it. Only the base of Mikdash you're allowed to bow down on stone, nowhere else, not on the shul, not in the home, you're not bow down on stone. And therefore Rav did not bow down because it's on a stone. So the Gemara, like Ula said, only stone. So the Mayyid Adam, why only Rav refused to say Tachan fills a payim of Filukunami? Everyone shouldn't have done it. Says the Gemara, Kamei Rav had it. It was right in front of Rav. So, and therefore, he's the only one who didn't bow down. Says the Gemara, so all you had to do is move over to the next person's place and bow down there as well. But let him go to the rest of the shul area where there was no stone floor. And who'll do the fills of time there? Says the Gemara, like, if he stands up, then everybody would stand up and wait for him to go wherever he's going. And if he didn't want to be matriach the community. Or another answer is that Rav Pishit Yodaim Raglaim Haba Ovid. In other words, the first opinion of the Gemara is you're not allowed to bow down on stone. It doesn't matter whether you stretch your hands and feet out, or even if you just put your head down on the ground. With the Rabbanan, that is forbidden on stone. And so shul, for example, today when we go on Yom Kippur, if there's a stone floor, so you don't bow down on the stone floor. Even though we're not doing the whole your Pishit Yodaim Raglaim, the whole thing, you don't bow down on the floor because some say it's Rabbanan Nasa. But if it's not a stone floor, it's a wooden floor, for example, or a carpet, it's not a problem. Said another answer what it is no. Second answer what it believes that if you don't do Pishur Reglaim, then even on the stone floor it's permitted with the Rabbanan Ma'atayda, everything as Tais explains. The boy saying, Rav Pishur Reglaim have it over. He did Pishur, he stretched his hands and legs out. That's the problem. If you wouldn't have done that like everybody else, then even with the Rabbanan, there's no problem on stone floors. Everyone had a stone floor, but they didn't do Pishur Reglaim, they didn't stretch themselves all the way out. Do like Ula said, also the Tate and also Pishadam Reglaim Bavad, only Pishadam Reglaim Bavad, and according to Tate, that's Mirabon as well. And says the Gemara, the Lipol what's the big deal? So let stone floors, let them do the fills up and say Tachan, but let Evid Pishadam, don't do the full, with the stretching out the hands and so on and so forth. Said the Gemara, he didn't want to change his mimic, if we just avoided saying it altogether. The boy saying, Adam Chashav Shiny. A chosh of a person is different. You don't do the tefillah of in public if you're doing it on behalf of the community. Because the Abelazar, another chosh of the shayli papan of Elin Kain Nani Kishu B'nai. Now doing the tefillah of has Gemara as well. Before, unless you know for sure you can get responded to like Yeshua. The chesiv said, Yeshua Kumlach, stand up. By Achni, what was going on? He said, Hashem, stand up. You shouldn't do the tefillah of you don't know that you're for sure going to be answered. And therefore, as Tais explained, it's only talking about when you're davening on behalf of Klal Yisrael. If you're doing it for yourself, it doesn't matter. So what we learned. So we have different forms of bowing down. So the Gemara says, what's kida? Kida is all a pine. Kida is putting your head on the ground. Shema says, we see that the Bashava bowed down with her head to touching the ground twice. So therefore, that's called kida. Kriya, when we say Kriya, what's Kriya? B'kaim, that's on your knees. It says in the pasuk, Mikroya al Birkov. He was kneeling on his knees. He's standing up and kneeling on his knees. And what's Ishtachavo? Zu Pishi Dan Raglayim. Ishtachavo means you're stretching out your hands and your legs, completely lying down on the ground. So it says, Havai Nove Anivi Imcha V'Achecha Ishtachavo Arza. And I and your mother and your brother will bow down to him in on the ground. So Yosef was saying to his brother, Levi. Achve Kida Kamei the Rebbe Levi once demonstrated. We had this in our Tinus as well, and Sukkah Levi once demonstrated how Kida done before Rebbe Itla, and then he became limp. He became lame. Now, what actually when you do Kida, if you do the right way, you don't use your hands. So you put your head all the way on the ground. And you put your thumbs there like you don't push up on your thumb, but your thumbs don't have the power to lift your body. So really what's holding up your body is your waist, is your hips. And when you try to stand up, you don't use your hands because you only have your thumbs there. So all the weight goes on your hip. And therefore he somehow or another wasn't focused correctly. And he misplaced and he dislocated. Is it? Says the Gemara, is that the reason why he just let him? That Levi said something to the Eibishter that you forgot about your children, and that's why he was punished. So there was a great man who said some words against the Eibishter, some words which are a bit brazen. And that caused them to become limp. Who is that? Levi. Says the Gemara, they both caused it to happen. In other words, these two events together caused it to happen. Because you can get a punishment, and then when he's vulnerable, the Yetzer Hara always attacks someone when they're vulnerable, and that's what happened. Says the Gemara. We talk the matzle. When they did the filas apayim, they wouldn't do it straight on; they would do a little bit sideways, and because Adam Chashav really shouldn't really be mappal on his panav unless he knows what they answered. So therefore, he did a little bit sideways. Sounds from the way Rashi learns the Gemara. That's not like Trace the only way they daven on behalf of others. Even they davened for themselves. That's what they did. And a little bit further, the Yom Tov Chamisha Ben Kippur Shisha Masis and Mani. Who's also on Mishnah? Yom Tov is 5, Yom Kippur is 6, Shabbos is 7, and you said that you're allowed to add aliyahs. Our Mishnah doesn't conform with any Tana. What do you mean? Let Noya B'Shmol Rabbi Kippur. Time we learned the Yom Tov according to Rabbi Shmuel. Yom Tov is 5. Yom Kippur is 6 aliyahs. Shabbos Shiva. Exactly like the Mishnah said, like we do, but. You're not allowed to add to that. That's 7. Divrei Bishmol. Rabbi Kiva says, B'Yom Tov Chamisha, U'Yom Kippur Mishiva, not like our Mishnah. 7 on Yom Kippur, U'Shabbos Shisha. Ein poichsin mehen avom, you could add. So our Mishnah sort of incorporates both opinions. It says you're allowed to add, but it says Shabbos is 7. So who is it? Mani, Rabbi Shmuel Kasha 7. It says in our Mishnah you're allowed to add. Shmuel says no. Rabbi Kiva Kasha Shisha V'Shiva. The order is wrong. Our Mishnah says Shabbos is 7. Rabbi Kiva says Yom Kippur is 7. This is the Ton Rabbi Shmuel. The Yom Tov Chamish Yom Tov is 5. The Yom Kippurim Shish Yom Kippur is 6, and the Shabbos Shiva Shabbos 7. Ain't poichsim, and you don't diminish. Avol meisifim, you do add. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. These are words of Rabbi Shmuel. So there's another brayso that learns like our Mishnah that on Shabbos is 7, and you're allowed to add. Says you want to find, but Kasha Rabbi Shmuel. You have a contradiction. Rabbi Shmuel. Which one is it? Says you want to trei tanoi eliba de Rabbi Shmuel. There are 2 tanoim according to Rabbi Shmuel. Just to form a lines, man tanu hadatan. So who learned the following brayso? The Yom Tov on Yom Tov ma'achin. Yom Tov. You come to show a little bit later. The davening times on Yom Tov, it's brought down Shulchan Aruch, should actually be a little bit later than the rest of the time, because you can still prepare a little bit for the meal Yom Tov in the morning. You don't daven, and the Chazon shouldn't gargle too long, so you go home and you can enjoy your Yom Tov. The Yom Kippurim, you're coming early. There's nothing you do at home, so you go to shul early. Let's do at home. You come back, so you stay in shul longer. And Shabbos, and the Gemara is going to think that how do you stay in shul longer in Yom Kippur? Obviously, the davening is a lot shorter than ours, was by having an extra aliyah. So it sounds like Yom Kippur has more aliyahs than Shabbos, because Shabbos, you can't really cook anything, and you're not allowed to prepare, and it's butter and all that, so you don't really prepare much before davening. So you go to shul early. Or you don't stay in shul too long, so you can go home and enjoy the Shabbos. So Leimah Rabbi Akiva, the Islay Gavri, you say that it says that Yom Kippur you spend more time in shul. Sounds like this is Rabbi Akiva who has one more aliyah. Says no proof. I feel tame Rabbi Shmuel. You can say to Rabbi Shmuel, who said we're talking about aliyah? The nafish siduda the yema. The davening itself is long. The piyutim came much later, but the davening itself is long on Yom Kippur, and that's what it means. Okay, we'll stop over here and continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem.